So I'm proud to be introducing our next speaker, Dr. Prasad Katulanda, who is in fact my batchmate. He is currently a senior lecturer in medicine at the University of Colombo Faculty of Medicine and a consultant endocrinologist. He has a large number of publications and many oration, 8 orations and 7 books to his credit. And he will be speaking to us today on managing patients with long-term steroids and metabolic syndrome. Over to you, Prasad.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Indira, for those kind words of introduction. I think all of you all are very well aware that steroids are increasingly used nowadays in medicine compared to the past because of its utilities in autoimmune diseases, vasculitis disease, and also in conditions like asthma, and then post-organ transplant, and even I think there may be a lot of dermatological conditions where both topical and systemic steroids are used. So the effects of steroids are multi-system, and they have their beneficial effects on suppressing immunity, particularly if you take like the arthritis, parts of the disease-modifying regimes, and also it's very useful, particularly in severely painful rheumatological conditions, as well as when the immune system is going haywire to get it under control in autoimmune conditions. And also, there's a lot of other situations where it is going in the opposite directions where it can cause harm. Particularly, it predisposes people to infection and also has many skeletal effects, both for bone, like osteoporosis, avascular necrosis of hips, and then muscle. It leads to steroid myopathy. And then there are many CNS effects like even acute psychosis, depression, and so on. And also through the hypothalamo-pituitary axis, it can suppress the HPA axis. And there are a lot of metabolic effects, like it can cause abnormalities in our lipid metabolism and increase deposition of fat, leading to central obesity mainly. And also a lot of other cardiovascular effects like increasing hypertension and increasing cardiovascular risk. And also we know that particularly when used along with NSAIDs leads to increasing peptic ulcer disease, cataract, glaucoma in the eyes. And then I told you about the cardiovascular risk because of perhaps hypertension, dyslipidemia, diabetes, as well as the endothelial dysfunction. So in the liver, it leads to increased glycogen deposition as well as increased gluconeogenesis. In peripheral tissues, leads to inhibition of glucose uptake and utilization, and therefore insulin resistance. In adipose tissue, leads to increased lipolysis, so you can have increasingly circulating free fatty acid pool, and then increases total cholesterol, triglycerides, and also decrease the protective HDL cholesterol. The long-term other metabolic effects, as I said, because of the effects like the insulin resistance and gluconeogenesis, you get hyperglycemia, then protein catabolism, obesity. Coming to the steroid-induced diabetes, the effect is dose-dependent. These data are for the white Caucasians. Like if you get 10 milligrams of prednisolone, the relative risk of diabetes becomes 1.8. And when it comes to 30 milligrams, it's about 10.8. But we know the South Asians have a higher risk of diabetes. Therefore, these effects might be much more, and even in our practice, I think we can see even small doses of steroids, glucocorticoids leads to diabetes. And particularly those with other risk factors like the age, family history, past history of gestational diabetes, obesity, they have higher risk. And even we see when people are given fairly high doses of steroids, they sometimes present with even hyperglycemic emergencies like diabetic ketoacidosis, and in particular type 1 patients can come up with diabetic ketoacidosis. The non-endocrine side effects, I told you about the suppression of the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis, and we all know about iatrogenic Cushing. Sometimes they come with florid iatrogenic Cushings. The children, they can get inhibition of linear growth due to the fusion of epiphysis, and also can have reduction of sex steroids, and some people can develop sexual dysfunction. And I think you might recall this in our physiology days, the various higher stimuli like the stress, cytokines, normal diurnal rhythm also affects the hypothalamus, and through this the CRH, corticotrophin releasing hormone, stimulates the pituitary, and the pituitary in turn produces ACTH to stimulate the adrenal cortex, and the cortisol is secreted, and through feedback inhibition, this is kept under check. This is the HPA axis. But when you give several weeks of glucocorticoids like prednisolone, you can get the suppression of both the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and the lower ACTH leads to adrenal atrophy. And then continuing glucocorticoid therapy will look after the deficiency. But once the glucocorticoid therapy starts tailing off, then this leads to secondary adrenal dysfunction or failure, with features like fatigue. Sometimes if it is severe nausea, vomiting, they can come with classic adrenal crisis. And then this is because the adrenal cortex is atrophied, and this goes on for sometimes weeks to months to even years for it to recover, if based on the duration of the use of glucocorticoids. And this can be detected by using stimulation tests like the synecton or synthetic ACTH test. And then sometimes these people will need replacement therapy until the endogenous adrenal recovers. Coming to cardiovascular effects, I told you about the increase in sensitivity of catecholamines and angiotensin II, which is called permissive effect or action. Reduced nitric oxygen is thought to be one of the major mediators of endothelial dysfunction. And then there's increased angiotensinogen synthesis, as well as action of distal nephrons leads to increased sodium resorption and potassium loss. And coming to the effects on the skeletal effects, I told you about the osteoporosis, muscle weakness, and because of both these, and also particularly because of the muscle weakness, people can have higher risk of falls, and they can get fractures because of the weak bones. And then we talked about avascular necrosis and this growth inhibition in children. So this is the pathogenesis of osteoporosis. There are multiple mechanisms acting. When there is reduced muscle mass and reduction of our activities leads to mechanosensing and increased apoptosis and of osteocytes. And this increases the skeletal fragility. And then there are multiple other agents or the mechanisms that leads to reduced proliferation of osteoblasts, which are the cells responsible for bone formation, and also increased apoptosis, and as a consequence reduced bone formation. And then there's a close interaction between the osteoblasts and osteoclasts through some of these agents like rank ligands, and as a result there is increasing survival and reduction of apoptosis of the osteoclasts, which are the cells that responsible for bone resorption. So there's a balance goes towards increasing bone loss. So this is how the glucocorticoids leads to osteoporosis. And this is an X-ray of a person with quite normal looking femoral head to fairly severely affected avascular necrosis. I don't need to, I think, talk to you about the dermatological manifestations of glucocorticoids like the thinning of skin, striae, fungal infections, acanthosis, particularly with central obesity and insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. This happens, then the acne, then purpura, petechiae, and other skin bleeding, and so on. Now let's see how we can minimize the harm due to glucocorticoids. We need to use the lowest dose of glucocorticoids as much as possible, which is effective, and also you should select the appropriate potency and the route. But this is, I think, particularly important for all of us because a lot of if the great effect can be achieved by using topical steroids sometimes, as well as when it's come to asthma, even using inhaled steroids and so on. And this should be used for the shortest period of time. And then when it is going on unduly prolonged, we need to consider steroid sparing agents, and also always need to think about pre-existing comorbidities and the risks, and also the monitoring. And these are the pre-existing conditions that increases the risks of side effects of glucocorticoids like diabetes or prediabetes, obesity, hypertension, any heart failure, edema, pre-existing cataract, glaucoma, history of ulcer disease, history of infections, and low bone density osteoporosis, or family history of in these conditions in the first degree relatives. So you need to always consider about giving some protection by lifestyle measures to your patient, particularly healthy diet, which prevents obesity and dyslipidemia, and also physical activity has multiple benefits. It improves your bone health, the integrity of bone, also the muscle strength, and improves insulin sensitivity, endothelial function. And also you need to be cognizant that this can be challenging for patients sometimes, like those who have either rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, so on. Then you need to get the support of experts who can have specialized, individualized exercise. In terms of metabolic control, particularly hyperglycemia, diabetes, I think it's a good practice to always have baseline fasting blood sugar, HbA1c, because if you inadvertently give high dose of glucocorticoids to an undiagnosed diabetic person, he can come to us with hyposmolar coma. And also, we need to screen for symptoms at every visit. Monitoring glucose through HbA1c or fasting after starting treatment. Particularly if you are going to give high doses, it may be worth doing a short glucose test like a fasting blood glucose after about 48 hours, and then monitor initially 3 to 6 months first year, and then thereafter annually. And also measuring the weight always is useful. In terms of cardiovascular protection, you need to assess their lipids 1 month after glucocorticoid initiation, and then about 6 to 12 months, and also may be useful to assess the cardiovascular 10-year cardiovascular risk, and then other risk factors like cigarette smoking and so on. And then also I think we discussed about this. We don't do this very routinely about immunizations. But I think this is good practice because these people can get very badly affected with infections, particularly like influenza vaccine, pneumonia vaccines, and other vaccines based on their risk level. So this is something that we need to think of incorporating to our practices and in our clinic settings. And always we need to monitor for adverse effects and particularly screen for these things, and send to the relevant clinics through multi-specialty care. Coming to the protection on bone, we should ensure adequate intake of vitamin D. International guidelines say 800, but in our practice to maintain vitamin D normal status, Sri Lankan people, usually normal built people, need about 2000 international units. adequate calcium intake is important, then appropriate exercise and the healthy diet. Then what are the other strategies to in the management of long-term steroids on the bones? Particularly in children and adults, we need to do a clinical risk assessment. And then in children, no further assessment is needed. When it is adults less than 40 years, if there is a history of osteoporotic fracture or other significant risk factors, you need BMD, bone mineral density testing by DEXA scan within 6 months of starting glucocorticoid therapy. If not, it's not mandatory to do BMD testing. In older adults, you need the formal FRAX screening. I will go through that as we go on, and then need BMD assessment. So the fracture risk assessment is done by using this tool. It's a computer-based online tool. There's a country-specific tool developed by Professor Lekamwasam. And then based on the risk assessment, we can certify them as high risk, intermediate risk, or low risk. And if it is high risk, you treat them. Low risk, you monitor them. Intermediate risk, you do bone density assessment and also reassess the probability, and based on that, if they are high risk, then treat them. And then you might need to do adjustments for the FRAX based on the steroid dose. You can see that. And then also based on the FRAX assessment, you can straight away consider treatment, or you can consider measurement of BMD, or whether you can defer them and monitor them. I don't go into details about the risk stratification, but what I want to highlight is that based on the age, you can stratify them as low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And then I think it may be like a bit small. I apologize that, but based on the age, so if it is more than 50 years or equal, then you need to do counseling and take general measures, as I said earlier. And if it is the patient is quite old, more than about 70 years, or on prednisolone more than 7.5 milligrams, you need to consider treatment. If not, then as I said, we need to do FRAX assessment, and based on the risk, again, you can decide treatment. If not, you monitor them and follow them up. And then again, if they are less than 50, if there is high risk like previous fracture, you treat them. If not, you consider treatment if there is other risk factors. So BMD shows osteopenia. You need to follow them up, and also particularly do every 2 years BMD assessment if the patients are on this thing, and then follow up these patients based on the risk level. You decide the follow-up. And then management of this hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal axis is also very useful, important in these patients on long-term glucocorticoids. And then we should always think whether the patients have indications for withdrawal. And then also there are some indications for rapid tapering or immediate withdrawal, like the severe psychosis or herpes virus corneal ulceration. And if somebody has Cushingoid appearance, or if they are on more than 20 milligrams of prednisolone in the morning or at any time, or more than 5 mg in the evening, it's likely that the patient might have HPA axis suppression. And other considerations also need to be made in withdrawing steroids. There are different regimes which can be used for withdrawing steroids. I will not go into details here because of the interest of time, but based on the initial dosage, usually every 2 weekly, you need to reduce the dosage so that the patient one aspect won't get a flare up, and the other aspect they will not get severe symptoms and also won't go into adrenal crisis. Now coming to my other topic, metabolic syndrome, there's a long history of the people talking about the clustering of various cardiovascular risk factors like central obesity, dysglycemia, low HDL cholesterol, elevated triglyceride, high blood pressure. and also some people have thought about some markers of inflammation also. Different names have been given to this syndrome at different times, but this term metabolic syndrome have now come and stayed there for about several decades. Several organizations proposed several definitions and criteria, but this was becoming a mess. As a result, a lot of international bodies have got together and have come up with a uniform criteria to diagnose metabolic syndrome, which makes it necessary to have central obesity for everybody. This should be ethnic specific for Sri Lankans and South Asians. Waist circumference for women more than 80, for men more than 90. And also with that, you need to have raised triglyceride, reduced HDL cholesterol, raised blood pressure, or raised fasting glucose, or on treatment for diabetes. These are some of our own data showing the prevalence of metabolic syndrome, particularly common in women, much more than men, because they are more centrally obese, and based on the different sector, urban sector has higher prevalence. And there were controversies of the metabolic syndrome because there's no single etiological factor, and there were several different definitions, and no genetic markers have been identified yet. And also because some of these other factors like high sensitive CRP, leptin, and so on also tends to cluster with metabolic syndrome. But now largely these issues have been clarified. Most people think that the main unifying factor is central obesity. In people who have metabolic susceptibility, either due to genetic causes or other lifestyle related causes, they can get this clustering of metabolic risk factors, which we have already spoke to you, and this will lead to the increasing inflammation, increasing insulin resistance, increasing atherosclerosis, and as a result, increasing cardiovascular events. A lot of studies have shown that metabolic syndrome predicts diabetes. You can see here different definitions have been predicted in this ROC curve, and when you have a multivariate model of taking all these other clustering factors, you have a fairly good probability of predicting diabetes. And this have been looked in using different criteria, but you see whereas with comparison to no metabolic syndrome, when you have metabolic syndrome, all these studies have shown that it increases the risk of diabetes. And this data also shows that when you have both metabolic syndrome and diabetes, it increases the risk of death and compared to somebody who does not have metabolic syndrome or diabetes or cardiovascular disease. Now, metabolic syndrome gives us an opportunity to intervene with lifestyle and when it is necessary, even pharmacological methods. Once people were talking about a polypill where you have low dose aspirin, low dose statin ACE inhibitor to reduce the cardiovascular risk. But this has largely now gone away, the polypill like theory. But always you need to talk about and think about the lifestyle, diet, physical activity, maintaining ideal weight, and thinking of reduction of other CVD risk factors, diabetes, and when appropriate about pharmacotherapy. And particularly you need to think about this Mediterranean type diet with high amounts of green vegetables, non-sugary fruits, lean meats or fish, and not having too much processed food which has high hydrogenated vegetable oils and salt.
You have 2 minutes more.
And also physical activity, and particularly other cardiovascular risk factors like smoking. You need to elicit these things in the history. And pharmacotherapy mainly, if they have high lipids, statins, fibrates, if they have triglycerides, then the glycemic control, if they have high blood pressure, particularly renin-angiotensin system blockade, and if they have very high risk of cardiovascular disease, antiplatelet therapy. So, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, the metabolic syndrome is a risk factor clustering, which is a powerful concept, and there is a lot of data showing that it predicts diabetes and cardiovascular disease, but there is uncertainty on the pathogenesis of metabolic syndrome. There is opportunity for CVD and diabetes risk reduction, and also the recognition will help primary care workers and even general public to focus on risk reduction. However, we need more research on etiology, pathogenesis, and outcomes from prospective studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prasad, for that very comprehensive lecture. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Prasad, for that very interesting presentation. Us dermatologists, we tend to use a lot of pulse therapy, both in the form of IV pulses and oral pulses. What is your view regarding safety in using pulse? We think that it helps to reduce side effects and the safety profile improves.
Definitely, pulse therapy will lead to reduction of mainly hypothalamo-pituitary axis suppression. But if you are using long-term, very high doses of pulses, particularly acute metabolic derangements, as well as osteoporosis, you might have to be mindful. So you need to concentrate on those things, and sometimes even during this very acute stage, some people might get very high blood glucose, and at least even the patient may not be on formal diabetic treatment, they might need some glycemic management and so on.
Thank you. And also, can you tell us, in this era of COVID, our patients on steroids, about the vaccine, what can you tell us about advice?
Actually, anyway, if somebody is on fairly high dose of steroids, the effect might not be that great.
But we can still go ahead. We can ask them to go ahead. We don't have to stop, withdraw for some time.
I haven't come across anyway. I think withdrawing for COVID vaccine might be not a good thing, because anyway, even patients who are on regular steroids, particularly my patients who are having adrenal failure, when they get fever, I have asked them to even double their doses, like the stress dose and so on.
Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you, Prasad. Just want to know, this deflazacort and oral betamethasone, do they have an additional benefit to bring down the side effects than methylprednisolone or prednisolone with regards to diabetes? Because these are newer drugs that they talk about.
I think there may not be, but there's this glucocorticoid conversion of different. Based on that potency, you might have to go on that. But I haven't come across major any.
No, they talk more about hyperglycemic side effects are very much less with deflazacort.
In the diabetes circles, they have not been discussed in a great way, but maybe still new. So you might need to have some data.
Thank you.
So we use mainly dexamethasone pulse. So is there a big difference by using methylprednisolone and in these effects, methylprednisolone pulse or the dexamethasone pulse, which we use for the pemphigus patients?
The pulse therapy, it's mainly, I think, what you might have to concentrate on the anti-inflammatory efficacy rather than because it's anyway not long term, no. So I don't think there's a major difference in terms of prevention of side effects in that instance, where you might have to decide based on the efficacy for the patient.
Thank you, Prasad, for that very interesting lecture and the lively discussion. Please accept our token of appreciation.